I'm going to adjust here. Welcome, everybody. Greetings and welcome to the third Midstream on Zoom, where monthly we celebrate original works read, performed by their creators. Tonight, these are Nicole Lynskey, Roy White, Carolyn Holbrook, and Jim Bohen. Paul Mattis is our technical director and a poet in his own right. I'm Mimi Jennings, and I'm honored to be your host. Protocols. After each reading, we will all be unmuted for applause and cheers, and then muted again. After all 4 readings and cheers, I'll have a few announcements, and then Paul will open your mics for a Q&A or chat. Greetings, visiting. Tonight's reading is being recorded and goes up on YouTube in a few days. Please check the website. That is in the chat, as are the names of our readers tonight. I'll start with a couple of my own poems. First, a sonnet, Specs for a Vaccine. Cure for a plague, scientist in your lab. Magic, please, poet in your bubble. Opening and health, if it's no trouble. A taste of our own medicine, a jab. We're after patience and newly normal trust. We want grown-ups, sticklers. The urgent call goes out, antigens for avarice, aerosol born. We'd like, well anyway, we must all live together. Delivery from the germ would be a plus. Set sentry dogs for lungs, a watch for wisdom. We'd love to learn to love. No match then for a novel worm. The long path teaches, yes, though we worry, just now a charm, we're kind of in a hurry. And then this one, the new Horace Greeley, Go North, Young Man, in memoriam, George Floyd. Houston's no place a black man should trust with his life. Go where the law is respected, Big Floyd, go north. Start where the words all are equal have meaning, where they hold them sacred, Minneapolis. Shelter in place, survive COVID virus pandemic. The law of ironies has one in mind, much worse. Pink slip pocketed, your mama gone. Find sacred, friendship, church. Memorial Day, 38th in Chicago. Hear a sidewalk choir as law enforcement forces out your life. Their words, he's a man, bro, serenade you on to your sacred Gilead home. And you, uniform, place your indifferent neck under the knee of the law you're sworn to protect. Say 20 times the words I can't breathe to unhearing ears. Feel how sacred, how heavy is justice. And now I'd like to introduce Nicole Lynskey. She's a poet, mother, and currently a grad student in St. Mary's MFT therapy program. Her first poem, Ronnie Reagan, Dear, I Love You True, written after swearing to her 10th grade English teacher that she couldn't write poetry, made it onto the classroom wall. She's been writing poetry ever since. Nicole has been at times active in the Minnesota poetry scene, organizing readings and events, and founding Loose Leaf Poetry in 2004. Her poetry has been published in Cairns Art Journal, Epicenter, Main Street Rag, Dust and Fire, and elsewhere. She lives in St. Paul with her husband, 13-year-old son, and their much-loved but ill-behaved housemate, Cookie the cat. Nicole Lynskey.
Thank you. Thank you, Mimi. Thank you for having me. Thanks to Midstream Series. So, in picking out my poems for tonight, it's such dark times that I unfortunately picked out dark poems to go with the dark times, although it does get a little better towards the end. So this first one I wrote about 5 years ago. It's called Howl. Howl. You could cry rivers, scream until the cats cowered, until your husband, with his pitch-perfect ears, stopped asking, until your vocal cords, with their strange, sinewy lips, grew dry and brittle. It would come on suddenly, waking each morning to the clipped, bow-tied voices on public radio, telling you stories your mother would have never allowed. Murder over and over, children on children, co-workers on co-workers, young men who explode in nightclubs, on and on, day after day, like the constant dry clicking of the second hand of a clock. And the desperation. So many people, so much hunger. It comes at you like a pack of wolves across a frozen prairie that for days and days have found nothing, no rabbit, no frog, no fox, until they found you, saliva dripping from their lips, surrounding you, devouring you, until you are nothing but their howl. This second poem is called When God Came Into My Bedroom. And being a good Unitarians do not know the nature of God. They never profess to, nor do they even know if there's a God. So that's just the way this poem is written. But I also like to write stories. So this is a story about when God came into my bedroom. When God came into my bedroom. When God came into my bedroom with the moonlight, it was a night when my husband was at work. His spot was again cold and empty, and the only remaining cat had gone to sleep elsewhere. Suddenly, the whole room shone, and you could see the minute miles of everything. And I saw his eyes linger on the papers piled on the dresser and the worn underwear lying inches from the hamper. His eyes, which were blue oceans where stingrays flapped sideways through the salty air, seemed to say, "This is what you've done with the gift of the pink-hearted panties? This is what you've done with the cotton fields?" Well, I was thinking, fuck you, God. Look at this place you've created. You can't but totter on tiptoes without stepping upon some new suffering. Wars and hunger and cruelty and storms and fires and hatred and walls, and you've let some crazy asshole be president. And then his eyes fell unfocused on the dust of the windowsill. He was sitting there so quietly, I thought I could hear him thinking, "Look how you've squandered my bounty." To which I could think of no reply. At least that's what I thought he was thinking. But it might have been, "Look how beautiful the moonlight falls on the silver strands of your hair." I never did ask, and he never did say. We just sat there a long time in silence until I fell back to sleep and felt my cat curl into the bend of my legs. And I can hear my cat trying to make an entrance. She was showing up. In the sort of vein of story, I wrote this a long time ago for Deborah Keenan's class, who Deborah Keenan, many of you probably know, is a fabulous poet and teacher. And so this is called Stealing the Garden of Earthly Delights at the Prado. So it's a painting at the Prado. I don't know if you've ever seen the Garden of Earthly Delights. It has the triptych of hell, heaven, and earth. And I actually lived in Spain for 3 years. And so some of this is pulled from that too, but it's a story. 1. A hungry bird of a girl, barely afloat, She had sunk to her knees on the cold steps to squat, to rest by the garden of earthly delights. No está permitido, the security guard said as he lorded over her, the pregnant fat of his belly hanging over his duty belt, his voice ringing like a bell up the marble halls of the museum, sending her back to the streets with the hungry catcalls of old men, "St, guapa, st, guapa," past the plaza where yesterday she begged herself to a ragged edge of a man for a hit of smack. And on the metro they pressed her, even in her dirty blondness, for she was an other, and the police of their decency did not blow their shrill whistles. Over and over, these things had rubbed her like a stiff black shoe that did not fit until her heel, blistered and pregnant with pus, waited to pop. 2. An idea that seemed to suddenly appear, but was always there like a large lioness. Caper. The word rolled on her tongue as she walked up and down the crooked streets, the car exhaust turning her snot black. The sound was round in her mouth like a marble or an eyeball. She liked the black fabric of her new bandit outfit, how it fit the small cups of her buttocks and breasts. She was a nothing of a girl, a shadow sliding over the fence and along the walls, over the Grecos and the Goyas with their bulbous royalty, fitting easily in the flat expanse of shadow. Bosch's triptych, heaven, earth, and hell, but she took only one, for hell was the only earth she had ever known. So I got 3 more. These next 2 were written in April with the pandemic. And the first one's called Darkness and the second one's called Lightness. So I thought they made a nice set. So, such darkness. My heart is submerged below the water line. A monotony of sadness it thinks it can't survive, but it does. Longing, feel the length of the word, the middle, like a hammock you cannot get out of, wet with rain. Pull on the damp, gray cloth and fat drops shudder to the ground. Yearning for the world that was, almond milk lattes with concentric hearts poured in the froth. Zumba in a room crowded with women. A world that bowed at my feet like a servant. Everything strained through our fingers like it was nothing. It was never sustainable. Now we wait in our 3-bedroom castles, while outside the virus prowls on soft, padded paws. We hide, huddle in the long, silent expanse of minutes, moments, days, months, hoping it will forget us. And then on a somewhat lighter note, lightness. This is called Lightness. Where does it come from, this temporary lightness? A feather that floats from the ceiling of a birdless room. Suffering leans against the house like piles of musty leaves, rises above riverbanks, fills the shorelines like bloated fish, falls like frogs raining from the sky. People die in hospital hallways, waiting for a bed. People without food and roofs and doctors and jobs. And still, in the moments between the I am of the heart, there's an unexpected buoyancy. It's what the robins and cardinals with their dash of red call out from the rafters of my neighbor's 100-year elm. It's good to be alive. It's all they ever asked for. And this last one, I got a chance in 2005 to study with Nancy Willard, who has a very generous spirit and unfortunately is now passed. So this is called Instructions in Generosity. 1. Collect generosity. See the thin dust of it on tree leaves, on windowsills. Lift it off the wings of ladybugs, being careful not to harm them. Harvest it from the light of a well-wishing moon. 2. On Thursdays, sit with the daisies. With their one black eye, they will see the all of you. Quietly listen for their grassy voices. They will tell you all they know of kindness. 3. Visit the corn. In a chorus of voices, they will tell you the many joys of many, how easily the sun is shared, how much pleasure in drinking the rainwater together. 4. Learn the pine tar scent of humility. Slip quietly behind those likely, ministers or teachers or grandmotherly cashiers. Secretly sniff the backs of their necks. Once found, follow their fragrance down sidewalks, breathing deeply. 5. Repeat previous steps as needed. If you are not instantly repaired, do not despair. Sooner or later, the daisies will offer you apprentice. That's it for me. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Really good.
She took us there, and then she brought us. Okay, thank you very much, Nicole. Roy White. Roy is a blind person who lives in St. Paul with a lovely human and an affable lab mix. We have 2 of the 3 with us tonight. In the past, he worked as a software engineer and an ESL teacher. More recently, his poems have appeared in poetry in Boat, B-O-A-A-T Journal, Kenyon Review, Copper Nickel, and elsewhere. He can be found on Twitter at The Real Roy. Roy White.
Am I on? Thank you, Mimi, and thank you all for coming to listen, even though the Twins Inter-Squad game is being streamed on YouTube. My first poem started out with a Facebook message I received from a person I didn't know, who turned out to be a high school student doing an assignment on blindness, who had some questions. My reply also contained a question or two, and this apparently scared them off because I didn't hear anything further. The poem has a reference to Witter Binner, who 100 years ago got together with some friends and they made up a spoof literary movement called Spectrism, and they wrote a whole manifesto for it and wrote a bunch of poems to put in an anthology of spectrist work. And I'm sure they had a great time, but the problem was that there were so many literary movements like futurism and acmeism and imagism, and they were all so flaky that almost nobody realized that spectrism was a joke. Anyway, it's called Two-Way Mirror. Two-way mirror. He wants to know, this Dustin on Facebook, how I get through the day. I want to write, these days of murky winter, it's a challenge just to recognize the day. If the alarm hasn't gone off, I tap the talking clock to find out if it's morning or insomnia that's roused me. I get out of bed, hold one arm up, elbow bent, like I'm pushing my way through a crowd or trying to ward off a crowbar and brush the doorways left, right, left into the kitchen. I let water fill the bottom of the pot till it wets my fingertip, spoon coffee into the basket, and screw the parts together. Pour milk into the saucepan till the weight feels right. Turn on the burner and listen for the whoosh of it igniting gas. I could tell Dustin all this, But first I ask how he gets through the day, and that's the last I hear of Dustin. This happens sometimes to me, maybe to anyone who lives behind a two-way mirror. Last time we had some people over, I was telling a friend about Witter Binner, how for a lark he founded the so-called spectrist movement, even cooked a book of spectrist poems. When Shelley gently touched my arm and said, she's walked away. The next poem, Shelley Weefall has kindly agreed to help me out with the reading by reading some of the pieces. And this one started with something I read about Christopher Columbus. He was an enthusiastic but inept user of navigational instruments. And he, on one of his voyages, decided that he had discovered the Earth was not round after all, but shaped, he said in a letter to the Queen, like a woman's breast. And he felt that he had, in fact, located the nipple of the world. And it seemed to me that that said so much about people like Christopher Columbus that he would think the world had a nipple for him, that I really couldn't avoid writing a poem about it. So, Shelley?
Admiral of the Ocean Sea. When the guy walked in wearing only swim fins and a narwhal codpiece, it gave my Aunt Abigail the shock of her life, though she knew he was probably harmless as a jar of pickled herring. She'd always worried too much about fish, about everything really to do with the sea or even tap water. She couldn't tell anyone how she felt about washing dishes, reaching her hand under opaque suds to grasp who knew what edge or jagged shard, couldn't share the triumph she felt when she got rid of that garbage disposal, which never, to be sure, sucked her hand in and chewed it to a stump. But that didn't mean that it wouldn't have liked to. One time she queried Siri for a definition of jodhpurs and got back a list of articles about lobster. Her relief at seeing the man in the swim fins ignore her, slap his way to the bar and order an artisanal mojito, leaked away when he said, Columbus, on his third voyage, saw many irregularities, saw finally that the earth is not round, but has a bulge on one side, in the east, near the rivers of Eden, a bulge like a woman's nipple. Abigail knew the type, of course. The earth must have a nipple. Every ship must have a nipple, every island, every hill, every royal couple, every Genoese banker, every chain of slaves, a nipple on every barrel, cask, exotic plant, sealed document, every campaign, inner council, limo, TV show, photo op, on every intern.
Thank you. As you can see, I got almost to the end without mentioning the president. The next poem is called Gawker Slowdown, and it features my grandfather and the Tidy Bowl Man. I was born on my grandfather's 86th birthday, and thus my mother had to name me after him, although she considered Roy a hillbilly name. As you can imagine, my grandfather was from a time when the whole idea of TV would have been incomprehensible, and he never quite adjusted. Gawker Slowdown. A Gawker Slowdown is what it all comes down to. Each of us yearning for eyewitness evidence that the form slumped in the crumpled car is not wearing our clothes. I tell myself I'm not the chatty shill in the toilet bowl maelstrom, nor the worm in the bottle. Certainly not the giant foam hand pointing a pointless finger at the vacant sky. My grandfather never learned they couldn't hear him, the people on the edge of night and as the world turns. He'd worry at the doe-eyed girl formed by the electron beam and say, I wouldn't do that, or that, you know that man ain't no good, just as he told his only daughter, about that cotton mouth of an Emil she ran off to St. Louis with. Or so I imagine. By the time I sat in his lap, watching inscrutable soaps and waiting for a juicy fruit from his overalls pocket, they'd both been dead for years, my aunt and the man who killed her. Whew. Next up, I'm going to have Shelley read another one. And this one, sometimes to get sort of out of my head, out of my own head, I will take a poem I love by someone else and put it through Google Translate through different languages over and over and back to English until it's become, I hope, something rich and strange. And then I will use the pieces of that to make something of mine. And that's what I've done in this one with a couple of sonnets by John Milton. The one that begins, "When I consider how my light is spent ere half my days in this dark world and wide," and one in which he has a dream about his recently dead wife. And this one's called On His Blindness.
On his blindness. Considering the use of lighting in this dark, I am useless. Though my soul is more curved, though my life has been attractive, death is a secret gift, a hidden character. I thought I saw the holy, holy. I saw my deceased entangled saint. Her face was hidden in the face of the sky. Love, sweet, kind, shining, as bright as no face is, brought me back to the night during the day. Considering the use of this darkness of the world, blessed is the man prone to mischief, a hidden character denying the light. I present the work to a manufacturer, a personalized gift. Those who are alone and waiting endure his gentle shackles, attack God only on weekdays. They worship what they seek.
The next one will also be read by Shelley, and it is a poem in honor of my late father-in-law, Knut Wiefald.
Night shift nurse. Give us this day the night shift nurse, the IV stick, the antibacterial hand gel, Ensure milkshake and pills crumbled in applesauce, the pulse ox that beeps like a backing up truck. It's lovely, the patient's daughter said. I'm so goddamn sick of it. Snow crystals sparked in the sun. Yesterday's meltwater had frozen, leaving crunchy ridges and little rinks on the sidewalk. They would stay till spring came back, if it ever came back. The cardinal was singing, the car alarm bird, and after a moment she spotted it. Hello, Mr. Cardinal, you're looking good. Then she stood silent. Her husband felt her shoulder heave, knowing why this beauty made her weep, and knowing, too, that he could never use it in a poem. Blessed is the high-flow oxygen. Hassan and Gladys, who changed the depends, blessed the long silent corridor, the phlebotomist and the chaplain. It cost her father an effort to say hello. He fretted that he had somewhere to get to, had missed something important. She brought a book, an old anthology of modern poems. The old guy was not into modern poems. He liked things to rhyme. She found the one about a woodpile rotting beside a frozen swamp, where the snow crust holds you up until it doesn't. He said, read that again, so this time I'll remember. She did, though she knew he wouldn't. She read about the dead man whose horses are still plowing, and then about the falcon spiraling out of control. He smiled at her and said, you're an extremely good-looking orphan. She read to him about 9 bean rows and the bee-loud glade. He was asleep. Let us now praise the palliative care, the cannulae and the skin sore beneath adhesive strips. Praise the Haldol, Ativan, and morphine, the doctor who spots the family and scurries away.
Thank you. In my last poem, I had a teacher once who asked us to write a poem that was in a genre or style that was not at all what we would usually do. And so I decided to write a lullaby. And as previously mentioned, I live with a Labrador, a black lab retriever mix. And so this is a lullaby for him. Lullaby for a lab mix. The full moon hunts alone tonight. She dreams her dreams in black and white, but you may dream of what you like. So close your eyes and sleep. The squirrels have immunity. They know that you're in here with me, and nothing good's on squirrel TV, so they curl their tails and sleep. Those kids will stagger home before their drunken shouts have turned to snores, and they will not break down our door, so close your ears and sleep. Run now, run through pungent woods on silent loam. Hunt while you can with us, for soon we must all go home. Thank you.
Yay.
Thank you to you both. Shelley, it was beautiful you reading the poem about your father. That was lovely, lovely, lovely. So Roy White. And now we have Carolyn Holbrook. She's a writer, educator, longtime advocate for the healing power of arts. She's the founder and director of More Than a Single Story and executive director of the St. Paul Almanac. She is the author of a chapbook, Earth Angels, and an essay collection, Tell Me Your Names and I Will Testify, that comes out August of 2020. Let me add that her publisher, the University of Minnesota Press, has put it online for free as part of its Reading for Racial Justice list. So hop on U of M Press and you can read her stuff, anticipating the launch in August. She's co-author with Arleta Little of Minnesota civil rights icon Dr. Josie R. Johnson's memoir, Hope in the Struggle. Her personal essays have been published widely, most recently in A Good Time for the Truth, Race in Minnesota, and Blues Vision, African American Writing from Minnesota. She's the recipient of 3 Minnesota State Arts Board grants, a 50 over 50 award, and was the first person of color to receive the Minnesota Book Awards Case Sexton Prize. She teaches creative writing at Hamline University, The Loft, and other community venues. Carolyn Holbrook.
Thank you, Mimi, for inviting me to read tonight, and thanks everyone for being here. I see a few people that I know, so happy to see you here. Anyway, I'm going to read an excerpt from the chapbook that Mimi mentioned, Earth Angels, which was published by Spout Press. And the essay is called Earth Angels. Okay. As I sit in my car waiting for the light to change, I cringe when I see a bus nearing the intersection of 28th and Lyndale. Whenever I close my eyes, I find myself back inside the moment when the dark-clad woman crashed onto the hood of my car, slid into the street, hit the pavement, bounced, and then rolled into the gutter. It was 2 weeks ago, but still I can't stop my hands or my body from shaking whenever I draw close to that intersection. Let's see, I'm skipping over. People soon appeared, seemingly out of nowhere, some to see what had happened, others to help. A man in a dark green hoodie and tan cargo shorts called 911. I wonder why I remember the details of what he had on, but nothing about the woman who sat beside me and draped a blanket around my shoulders, along with a comforting arm, or the man who gave me a flower, or the person who turned off my car and handed me my keys. A young officer with a blonde crew cut took the police report. With a kindness in his voice that surprised me, he said he wasn't going to ticket me. This is a dark corner and she was dressed in dark clothing, he said. I probably wouldn't have seen her either. An ambulance snaked through the crowd, its siren making those intermittent chirps that warn people to make rooms so it can get through. While the EMTs strapped the woman to a backboard to place her inside the ambulance, I asked if I could accompany her to the hospital. One of them replied that they could only tell relatives which hospital they were taking her to. And then, as quickly as they arrived, they took off, siren blaring, leaving me standing in the street watching the crowd disperse into the night. I couldn't stop thinking about the accident over the next few days. Couldn't stop talking about it either. I needed to know if the woman was all right. Friends and colleagues advised me to leave it alone. She might sue you, they warned, but I couldn't leave it alone. My heart wouldn't be quiet. Neither would the nightmares and daytime images of her limp body sliding off the hood of my car. I'm skipping over. Early in the morning, 3 days later, the day the policeman said I could pick up a copy of the police report, I headed over to the precinct, which at that time was located on 24th and Nicollet. I hesitated before going in, fighting flashbacks of a night some years before when the cops burst into my apartment looking for my son. The digital clock on my nightstand showed 3:16 a.m. when I heard the hard, insistent knock. I jumped out of bed and ran to the door, sure that something horrible had happened. A look through the peephole revealed 3 beefy cops, each with a gun in the holster resting against his hip. A 4th man stood in front of them. I assumed he was a detective. He was wearing a suit that reminded me of cheap gray suits I see on detectives in movies and Law and Order. I opened the door slightly, leaving the chain secure. My heart was pumping so hard that I could hear it. The detective, a short, slender man with graying brown hair, flashed his badge and asked if my son was home. No, I replied. But before I could tell him that Stevie had called a couple hours before and told me that he was in jail having been mistaken for a guy who had committed a murder, the detective motioned to the others. They pushed past me and rushed into my apartment, snapping the chain on the lock. Wait, I screamed. Stevie's not here. He's in jail. But by then, they were storming through the apartment, knocking my furniture over, scattering toys and tearing covers off beds, yelling, "Where is he? Where the hell is he?" My other 4 children, who were much younger than 18-year-old Stevie, were disoriented from having been wakened so harshly. They ran through the apartment like scared rabbits, screaming their hearts out, while they watched the gang of burly white men in blue uniforms and guns rage through their home. Trying to stay calm, I picked up the youngest and placed her on my hip and led the others, who were clinging to me by then, into my home office, my bare feet sloshing through a wet spot on the carpet where one of the girls had soiled her nightgown. I called the detective into the room, then picked up the phone and turned on the speaker option and dialed the Minneapolis Men's Jail. I asked the man who answered if they were holding my son. The detective, clearly surprised by the response he heard from the other end of the phone, stopped his men. They left, leaving me to calm my children and to clean up the mess they had made. I never received an apology. Neither did Stevie. Okay, so relieved that the police report showed that the woman was uninjured, just bruised and shaken, I rushed home, grateful that her name, address, and phone number were on the document. I picked up the phone and punched in her number, rubbing my sweaty palms on my jeans while her phone rang. Her answering machine confirmed that I had dialed the right number, the number for Cassandra, the name on the police report. My lips parted, but the words I wanted to say stayed glued inside my mouth. I quietly placed the receiver back in the cradle and tried again an hour later. This time she answered on the second ring. Fearing that she might think it was a prank and hang up if I didn't say something soon, I let my words tumble out, telling her who I was and why I was calling. I listened to her inhale and exhale on the other end, sure that she was going to slam the phone down and probably change her number. But after a moment, she said, "I've been wondering how you're doing too." That was the last thing I expected to hear. So, long story short, I invited her to lunch so that I could really see for myself how she was doing. So, okay. All the way to the restaurant, I wondered if I would recognize Cassandra. Several weeks had passed since the accident, and all I had was the memory of her rolling off the hood of my car and into the gutter, and the memory of sitting on the curb holding her head in my lap. Let's see. So we tried to make a little small talk. We were at the Rainbow Chinese restaurant, and thankfully the fish were at the tank distracting us. So we were trying to figure out how to talk to each other. So finally, we found a way to talk. I wanted to tell her how sorry I was for the harm I had caused her, but was unable to find the words I had so carefully planned to say. Instead, she was the one who broke the silence. She cleared her throat, causing me to turn my attention from the goldfish tank and my heartbeat to rise in anticipation of what I feared she was about to say. Then she looked me in the eye and said, "You're an angel." So as it turned out, she was a Mormon. She was from wherever Mormons live, Utah or whatever. And she was in love with theater. And she had met some guy out there who was also in theater, and she followed him here. And she had been here for a few years, but was always just really worried about whether she would be able to reconnect with her family because they kind of disowned her. And she had also never lived in a city like Minneapolis before, in a neighborhood that was really diverse, and she'd never talked with people who were, different than she was. But she said that, okay, let's see. Okay, I can start here. She explained that, and I think that, okay, here we go. Okay, so she said that the accident had given her some clarity, and because of the accident, she felt that she could go home. So I'll just read these last few paragraphs. She explained that until the accident, she didn't think she could go back home. She feared that she would be shamed and wouldn't be allowed back into her family or her church. The accident helped me realize that I can go home. Then she thanked me for having been willing to be the messenger that gave her that clarity. I hugged her and walked slowly out of the restaurant, still feeling a little dazed, but glad that I had followed my heart and not allowed myself to be talked out of contacting her. I stood for a moment on the sidewalk in the misty rain and then got back into my car. All the way home, as the rain again echoed the beats of my heart, I thought about angels, some as messengers, others who come into our lives for brief periods of time, like my siblings and my beloved stepfather. The army of angels that I believe are always there guiding us, such as those who led me out of my troubled marriage and let me know that I could return home, and now the angels who brought Cassandra and me together to give her the same message. Maybe that's why I'm still here. Maybe my siblings completed what they came here to do. Maybe I still have work to do. So there's a lot in between the paragraphs that I read that would give more context to that last paragraph. But that's where I'll stop.
Thank you. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Carolyn. That's beautiful. Not only is I want not only. Okay, so Carolyn Holbrook. Jim Bohen. Jim is a poet-songwriter from St. Paul. His poems have appeared in the Minnesota Daily, Red Paint Hill Poetry Journal, Conclave, Third Wednesday, Cracked Walnut's Threshold Chapbook, and elsewhere. He's been shortlisted twice for the Urbachi Prize, an international competition. I Travel in Rusting Burned Out Sedans, his first collection of poems, was published in 2018 by Unsolicited Press. A music CD entitled Never Too Late contains his vocals on 12 of the hundreds of songs he's written. Samples can be heard at iTunes and CD Baby. Search for JB and the Phantom Band. Jim's promised to add a song to his performance tonight. Yeah. Bohen.
Good evening, everybody. Thanks for coming virtually. I'd like to thank Mimi for inviting me. Dave Shove gave me a chance to read in this series a few years back when I hadn't done so for decades. So the Midstream series will also always hold a special place for me. I'll start with a lighter poem. It's called Disagreement. It's not gonna rain. It is gonna rain. It's not gonna rain. Then why is it so dark? It's not gonna rain, I tell you. How can you say that? I brought an umbrella, so there is just no possible way that it can rain. Whoosh, buckets, barrels, tubs, drums, vats, spigots on open, hoses gushing, absolutely rocket launching, full blast jets of drenching rain. Damn, 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 I left my umbrella in the car. Here's one called After the Celebration of Life. Lost two younger brothers, and they're obviously in this poem. I'm writing a poem frantically. I race to get the words down, but to my horror, when I stop, all the words have disappeared. They've cloaked themselves in nothingness. They wear the paper's color now, smirk inside its hidden seams. I try to write the poem again, but as I try to claw it back, something intervenes, says it must intrude, insists it will not be ignored. It's showing me my mother, cold, so cold to the touch. It's showing me my father, awful deathbed look. It's showing me my youngest brother, sipping water through a straw. My other younger brother slowly deals the cards, another game of solitaire. I notice his swollen knuckles. They could have been on my parents' hands. His arms seem heavy. It's as if some little kid dangles there, begging and pleading for one more lift. So he must summon all his strength just to make a play. I must summon all of mine to write this nightmare down. This next one is a very formal poem, old-fashioned style. The title and the first line are from an untitled poem by Alice Walker. Love is not concerned with change brought on by circumstance, with looks annulled by gravity, with hope that had to change its course when challenged by experience. Love is concerned when we embrace a calculating tough, when we embed a lasting chill from the icy nails that life pounds in, when we let hurts that we receive chafe the tender into rough. Love is concerned with all the flimsy substitutes it sees, a youth that cannot be regained, thinking crowds give back love, thinking any selfish road will lead to some contented place. Love is concerned when people choose to emphasize disparagement, prioritize demean, when resentment, hate, and fear scream so loud, then try to take sole custody of all who choose to disagree. But in the end, love's main concern is when we swallow what is false, when bitterness is what we learn, and love we knew or could have known is lost. This next poem is sort of a request of a friend. It's the only poem from my book that I'll read tonight. Unfortunately, it's still appropriate. Excuse me. The poem is called Bitching. I bitch, they die. I kvetch that life isn't fair in a country where war can be fought elsewhere, but want is still allowed. I bitch, though I'm not so poor I ration my meds, though I'm not so poor I'm forced to live where dumb luck death occurs on a whim you can carve in your schedule in advance. I bitch, Though I'm not followed by security guards, pulled over by cops, even shot down inside my car or on the street for committing the crime of being black. I bitch. Though I don't have to ride on an overloaded boat or train, dig where the earth will cave, try to survive by making beds, bleaching people's vomit and blood, cleaning people's shit, living by a no-tree hill that slides down death when it rains too much. So what right do I have to bitch at all? I'm white, I'm male, I have most of what I think I want, far more than many who dot this rock have ever had or ever will. I have every right, precisely because they can't afford meds, are forced to live just where they do, precisely because they have to die because some asshole thinks they're a threat, or it's some revealed in stone God's will, or precisely because some jerk who sees the earth as a giant pie wants a bigger, sweeter slice to boost an ego, wallow in a narcissist's high. I bitch at selfish, including my own, at greed and injustice, at things, at life. I bitch and kvetch, complain and critique, criticize, cry, and bellow it out, with only a softening now and then note after my rant runs out of steam and a coo has replaced the retch in my throat. I bitch. They suffer and die, unjustly, sometimes horribly. They die and suffer again and again, lives barely lived, some barely alive. Me, I bitch. And it's something I will continue to do until I'm unable to bitch anymore. It's part of my job. It's the least that I can fucking do. Here's a mortality poem. It's called Still Can't Say Goodnight. I've never known how to say goodnight. I thought I did when I was young, but that was mere illusion, spangled up and trite. Now, when it's time to thank the hosts and bundle up to make the drive on icy roads and falling snow, suddenly reluctance comes, surprising in its strength. There's suddenly a strong desire for one more toast, one more view of one more dawn, even though, whether vibrant, subtle, gray, practice knows that nothing very new awaits. I didn't know how to say goodnight when I was young. Still don't have the knack, I guess. The hope is hosts who understand, who have a room to offer those who never planned a longer stay, want one anyway. This next poem was one that I wrote about 5 years ago while a particular knife attack that happened in Paris was in the news. This poem does not show me in a good light, but I think it's important to read it given what's happening now, because it's typical of how too many white people still think. Excuse me. The poem is called Racism. Beautiful spring in short sleeves day, on a walk with my wife, usual route, edge of a private college campus. Cars, bikes, joggers, strollers, dogs straining for every tree, always people all around, just like us, mostly white. We come up on a young black man walking slowly, large backpack. He looked behind to see who was there. My fear antenna rose a bit. It shouldn't have, but that's what it did. Could have signaled to change our route, cut through campus. Didn't. Antenna might be up a bit, but still quite low. Nothing was going to happen. As we passed him, looks exchanged. His seemed hard, unusually so. No hint of a smile, no nod, no words, nothing that said, isn't it nice to share such a day? Instead of thinking as we passed, he's probably tired, I was suddenly struck by a troubling thought. Is this how the brutal Paris attack, the one in the news, got its start? Would he take out a knife, rush from behind? What if he was crazy or a self-recruited terrorist? I could almost see being stabbed, shrill screams, thrashing arms, kicking legs, lots of blood. Is this when and how I die? I didn't have time to dismiss this thought, this stupid, crazy, ludicrous thought, to understand there really was no danger here. Attackers target malls and crowds, deliver whatever their message is in busy or well-known places. But when he scuffed his foot a few yards to our rear, I winced. My wife even noticed. I didn't turn around, felt like an enormous ass, a really stupid fool. Seconds later, when we stopped at a light, I turned to see if he was there. He was getting in his car. I've been told you should trust your fear, and there have been times when I was afraid of men whose skin was very white. But as I put my other self back in its far too fearful box, I didn't like what had emerged, didn't like the lunacy that I had seen crawl out. I also didn't like the fact that it never even crossed my mind until much later, much later, to consider another point of view, how it feels to be young and male and Black in a pale sea of privileged white. I'm going to finish with something that I think all poets should appreciate. It's on a little lighter note. Thanks again to Mimi, for everybody who came, and also to my fellow poets tonight, fellow writers. This poem, excuse me, is called The Envy Thing. Damn, I wish I'd written that. Most poets have said or thought those very words, or words to that effect. Time to admit the truth. Every poet who's ever lived has said or thought some words like that, and said or thought them more than once, no doubt numerous times, in fact. People not enamored of any kind of poetry cannot fathom what all the fuss is about. You envy words I don't understand, don't even want to read. But the concept isn't that hard to grasp. We all have a vein named envy. We make sure it gets transfusions. Envy also gets a seat, a very comfortable cushioned seat in most of our brains at the head table. And the place card envy sits behind, we're forced to admit we wrote it out. And whenever envy wants to stand, stretch its legs, take a stroll, we're the ones who help it out by pulling out its chair. Thanks.
Yeah, Jim.
He alive his mother.
Okay, thank you, Jim. Thank you very much. So we've heard from Nicole Lynskey, Roy White, Carolyn Holbrook, Jim Bohen. Would you put your fingers in the air for them, please? Thank you so much. It was great. A few announcements, and then we'll hear if anybody wants to greet anybody else across Zoom sphere. Please remember local businesses and arts organizations in these times. I'll mention Milkweed Coffee downstairs from our usual venue on 39th and Lake is now open and offers takeout. And Merlin's Rest Bar and Restaurant 3 blocks west that had regular midstream reserved seating. They're open for takeout and delivery. So find your equivalent in your time zone and what did I want to say? And support them. And then for further information for the YouTube posting and to get on the Midstream invitation list, please visit our website, the Midstream website. It's in the chat, so you can take it from there. And there you will find also the information for the reading for August. It'll happen on the 13th. And It will be, of course, on Zoom. Joyce Sutphin, Chris Bigalk, Max Garland, and William Reichard will be readers then. So it should be a good lineup. Okay, that's all I have to say. This has been wonderful. Thank you so much. The light is fading. I've got only natural light to go by. Okay, let's unmute and greet one another before we say goodnight. We can be here until what? I think Paul said another 15 minutes.
As long as we want to be.
Oh, as long as we want to be. Okay. Okay.
Thanks for putting this together, folks.
Yes. Yes.
Thank you, Mimi.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
Oh yeah.
Thanks, Amy. Thanks for having us.
Oh great. Yeah.
Paul for hosting us.
Hi, people.